Hello, everyone, and welcome to the HPL Gallery's Artist Talk series. My name is Jennifer, and today I could not be more thrilled to introduce to you artist and educator Elisabeth Pellathy. Elisabeth is the Associate Professor of New Media at UAB's Department of Art and Art History, and her work is often grounded in the intersection of traditional genres and new technologies. So with that, I'll leave it there and turn it over to Elisabeth to discuss her work and share her screen with us. How are you doing today, Elisabeth? Thank you so much for doing this.
Hi, thanks for having me. Thanks for the lovely introduction, and I can start to share my screen and get started with talking about some of my work.
Okay. I'm going to drop off in the background and I will be here listening.
So, I made my work into slideshow view. So I have a PowerPoint presentation I wanted to share. So thank you for having me. Thank you, Hoover Public Library, for supporting this project. Um, I wanted to talk a little bit about a few of the projects that I'm doing. Um, One of the works that I wanted to talk about was and is Visualize Bird Songs, which is a project where I am charting the sounds of birds to become two-dimensional and three-dimensional representations. So I'm interested in this intersection between art and ecology, and I'm also interested in this space that we occupy as humans that are mammals that need resources, but humans that also can be quite destructive of resources. And I've been interested in birds for many, many years, and I've been working with birds as a kind of allegory to self, um, and working with a lot of concepts from the book Bird in Art by Caroline Bugler. And there she kind of maps the human relationship and depictions of birds in art. So I was working with these 10 top most endangered birds, and I started making collage work to kind of talk about this idea of these birds being vital, but also cyclical and kind of concentric and existing in these spaces, and also talking about when you have something like these unique species, but they are starting to disappear. So, my parents-in-law are biologists and they are avid bird watchers. And I think that's part of what got me into birds. And I went to the Cornell Lab of Ornithology in 2015, and I did a research trip there, and I started working with the collections in the Maclay Library, working with scanning bird wings and photographing birds that are extinct in their collections that they have, but also working with the um, auditory sounds of birds. And, most animals make sounds or they have calls, but only kind of animals like birds exist in the idea of song, which is a very human space to have. So I kind of started thinking about how bird songs are vital to our everyday happiness, and how when we don't hear birds, that's an issue. And of course, Silent Spring um, was a big influence, and her work in that book. She's from Pennsylvania, and I'm from Pennsylvania, and there's a lot of affinity there. And I started listening to all of these bird sounds of the top 10 most endangered birds, and I started thinking about how we as humans always want to own things and possess things. And I was starting to put these bird sounds into physical form that would then be held under a bell jar, much like an 18th century collection. So I 3D printed the bird songs from mapping and charting the data um, of the sounds in a software called Rhino, and then 3D printing them to make these physical objects of sound. So here's a close-up of one of the bird calls, and everyone's gone to the Natural History Museum or has seen these bell jars of butterflies and birds displayed and wonder cabinets and all of these kinds of objects of art that were natural objects that were collected from all over the world. And I wanted to think about that relationship and that connection and what happens when these bird songs disappear and they just become objects. They just become these kind of still lives of sound. So here's another kind of object, the art of these bird sounds. And while I was doing this, I was also really interested in kind of charting these in a two-dimensional space. I'm a digital artist, and every time I'm working with digital material, I like or sees paint, just another way to kind of push things around on a canvas to create something new. So I was 3D printing these bird sounds, but I was also very interested in 2D or two-dimensional representation. So I started taking these bird sounds out of when you export them for 3D printing, they become stereolitho files. And I was taking the stereolitho file and I was putting it back into the software and I was cutting it to expose the two-dimensional side of it. And then I was using a CNC router to print these objects. So what you see here is, a color fill, and then the CNC router, which I replaced the router bit with a pen to map these dimensional 3D prints as 2D. And here's another image of that happening. And occasionally the machine makes mistakes. Like sometimes you don't grab all of the lines and you make a mistake. And I really became interested in that. So I'm not showing you any of that work right now, but in the future, you're going to probably see some of this work where I'm intentionally asking the machine to make mistakes to reveal some of the more kind of line quality, just like a drawing would be in art making. So these are actually accurate representations of the sound waves, and they're charted and they are data visualizations. And so those are the top 10 most endangered birds. And there they are in situ in a gallery setting framed. And also with a sound piece that shows the prints, and then you can listen to the sound of the different bird calls. And so that's one kind of project that I've been really invested in and have two different iterations of the iteration that's the 3D print and then the iteration that's the 2D print. And I did the top 10 most endangered birds because I wanted to do something more global. And I've also worked with birds of Alabama as well to kind of situate it in the location that I currently live in. And then I want to talk about another project that uses the same type of artistic formatting, but is quite different, which is the Cahaba River. So we live in Alabama, and the Cahaba River holds some of the most unique and beautiful species of mussels and bivalves and snails. The biodiversity of the Cahaba and of our river waterways in Alabama are amazing. In a Smithsonian article, it's likened to the quiet Amazon, where in the Amazon you might find a tiger, but in Alabama you find a snail. So I really was kind of enamored by the beauty of what Alabama has to offer in this very, very miniature scale. So I started going to Bibb County, um, which is a great access point for the Cahaba River. And it's also a place where, if you're interested in seeing the Cahaba water lilies, is a great place to go. There's an access road um, at Bibb County, and the Cahaba lilies bloom there every year. And that's kind of the iconic flower. I was more interested in these small, kind of minuscule things that go crunch that no one really um, pays much attention to or realizes as indicator species for the health of the river. And if these indicator species are not doing well, the health and well-being of the rest of the environment is not doing well. And we have a lot of, man-made, person-made um, destruction, like silt. Silt is a big issue that happens in our rivers that destroy our mussels and snails, um, as well as just pollution. And there's a lot of groups in Birmingham region that are addressing that, like the Cahaba River Waterkeepers, and their work addressing the, rising E. coli rates in the river, and kind of discussing environmental ways to stop industry from dumping into the river. And everything that happens upstream comes down to us in Alabama, so that's an issue. So I started collecting these beautiful representations of unique Alabama wildlife. And I started to do the same thing that I was doing with the bird songs. I was scanning them with a desktop scanner and making representational 3D prints. And you can see a 3D print in the background there of a shell. So I was scanning them, and I was doing the same thing. As I was scanning them, I was slicing them in a software and making them two-dimensional prints so that I could make these large scale prints. And I wanted to make the scale really large because these actual snail shells are quite tiny. They're, not very big. I mean, 3 inches is a pretty large shell to, 1/4 of an inch or even smaller. They're sometimes very minuscule and very miniature. And I wanted to print them quite large because I really liked this space of miniature and magnification, where something is a actual representation of an object, but you can change the scale, or you can work with the scale to alter how we view it. And I also wanted to kind of bring these works to the forefront of the conversation, that these tiny, tiny objects really are vital to our healthy ecology. And so then these are the finished prints. They're intaglio or relief printed, and some are overlaid, and some have bones in them, like that's a fox bone that I found along the river as well. And they kind of exist in this space of being recognizable representations of the object, and also kind of poetic distortions. And then that, in addition to the scale, changes the quality of the work. So there's another one, and on the bottom here, I actually layered 2 different prints on top of themselves to give this kind of quality of 3-dimension within the 2-dimensional space. And there's one with color. And then I also just wanted to briefly share some 3-dimensional objects that I've been working on as well. And you can quickly see that we've moved away from the Cahaba River. These works are based on the Gulf Coast of Mexico, which has very similar issues that the Cahaba River does, and the birds, and kind of exists in this space of necessary health ecology and the need of repair. So these are olive shells and crab shells and whelk shells that I found along the Gulf of Mexico that I'm then 3D printing and painting to make these tableaus. And this is another example. It is a wasp nest and a whelk shell that's 3D printed. And then the 3D print was cut in half, and there was this kind of foam inserted inside of it to mimic the ocean wave. So at the heart of all of the work that I do, there is this idea of formalism and staying within the formalistic language and barriers of art, and then also a lot of abstraction and play. I think that that's a really important part of being an artist, to kind of see what's there and then kind of push it and play and go back to it and reinterpret and reinvent and then play, and then end up with something that mimics the beauty of abstraction or natural forms, and also gives something that may be recognizable new life. So yeah, thank you.
That was really great, Elisabeth.
Yeah. Thanks. Thanks for having me. This is really nice.
I have one question. If you'd be interested in fielding that. When I do these talks, I tend to build the question around how Foster's article, The Archives of Modern Art. And I think this is a good foundational point for your question as well, because your work is so much about engaging with transformative methodologies. And in his article, Foster discusses how, for Baudelaire, memory was the medium of painting, and how artworks should not be overwhelmed by their precedents, but rather activate the memory of them and subliminally draw on them. What are your primary resources that you directly or indirectly point to with your work?
Yeah, so I think I'm a bit more literal in kind of also living, maybe not in the past, but in the very kind of immediate present. So I think my typical inspirations, or where I am drawing from, is my direct environment, what's happening in the kind of social ecology spheres of our world, and also kind of leaning really heavily and being very reliant on formalism. So I think that article is quite beautiful, and I think there's aspects of my work that are reminiscent of a history, but I hope that the history changes, that you know, the work brings out a bit more maybe social expectations of activism as opposed to memory.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would agree with you as a viewer. I don't think that you're necessarily engaging with the artists that came before you that were working in digital media. I don't think that your work is necessarily a dialogue with their work to an extent. It's more a dialogue with um, your own landscape and and work that is like research based and very very like curiosity driven and so I find your answer to be really great in that aspect.
I mean, we definitely are standing. I mean, if it wasn't for Pauline Oliveris and David Tudor and those sound artists and visual artists making the work that they did, we wouldn't even have these categories. So I mean, yes, there are definitely kind of these giants or in that space that I'm deeply kind of indebted to and drawn to, and worked with ideas of ecology and this idea that sound is something that is present, and as it happens it cannot happen again, and
Mhm.
they that these kind of moments in time are difficult to repeat. So there's definitely a lot of inspiration that I'm drawing from with those artists and reading those artists and researching those artists and feeling really kind of a deep sense of affinity to their work and the work that they make.
Mhm. And I exist like kind of like outside of those fields too. So your work was really exciting for me because reading like the bio on your Vimeo, it named artists that I wasn't familiar with and I looked them up and that was really great. So it's been nice to explore your body of work and find those resources. And your work, because it like engages with printmaking and sound, feels very layered and full too. So.
Yeah, but I mean there's a huge like a computer art society that is about making two-dimensional work from the digital sphere, and it's just an amazing group that does these really beautiful drawings and thinks about how digital drawings are a part of the conversation, right?
Mhm.
Mapping out pixels or um, thinking about how the that space of physical and digital can either collide or remain digital. And I think that's really exciting. It allows you to explore so many different genres all at once. And
Mhm.
I love that. I like to do that in my own work. And I like to feel like you can think like that, like a painting can have sound or a video can be physical. I really like thinking about those spaces.
Right, your work really harkens to the act of drawing. Yeah. So you're really activating that for me and triggering that kind of like response, like, oh, this is just a drawing, and it's so incredible because it is a drawing.
Yeah.
I also wanted to ask you about your folding paper piece and how that was made, and just give me a little bit more like metadata on that one because I took a class last semester called Descriptive Bibliographies, and it was all about the archaeology of the book and this language that librarians and scholars invented in order to describe books to each other, to make a documented description of a book so that you know other scholars that were over in Europe could understand what the book was like. It's like shorthand to describe a book. And also like the archaeology of the book was very much about like the act of bookmaking and how like the fold was this like secret um, kind of like it was like the skeleton of the book, the fold. Like you could know what kind of book it was based on the fold. It was a quarto or so forth. So I was interested in that piece and wanted to know a little bit more about it.
Yeah, I'm actually really glad that you said that, because I called it digital folding because I was not as deeply aware of that history as you just discussed, but somewhat aware of that history that, um, you know, at a certain time, whenever books were not readily available, the way that they were produced or the way that they were put together showed the craft. That was one way that you could kind of reveal the craft of who the maker was, and that the maker had this like little tiny secret space to exist in. And it's almost like, putting your, your signature on something without putting your signature on something is actually much more clever. So when I was making that work, I was at a residency called Signal Culture, where the tools that they had at the residency program were analog to digital tools. So it was a physical manipulation of um, video, much like a 3D print on the XYZ axis. And that's why those pieces have so much depth to them, because the manipulations that I was doing in real time and then capturing to make them digital was actually raster in video on those three planes. And I called that piece digital paper folding because of that kind of cascading effect and how much it looked like paper. I was kind of drawn to this idea that, yeah, this video is so physical, and it's so physical because I'm playing with the dimensionality, the axes of video imagery, right? And there's not a lot of times when we think about that, because we often think of video as being very flat, but it does actually exist in this other space that isn't flat. And those tools kind of brought that out. And to me, whenever I was making those experiments and playing with those shapes, I was always trying to find a way for the digital to look as close to a physical property as possible. So I wanted it to look like paper or like water or like flowers. And I was trying to mimic the shapes that you would find in nature with the video work. Yeah. So that was kind of my own set criteria that I used when I was at that residency. I was, okay, I have these tools and they're available to me. And um, they kind of only exist in a few places in the United States. And I felt very privileged to be there and felt very kind of like in awe of that space and this kind of freedom of a week to myself to create. And I thought to myself, okay, if I don't set up perimeters for myself, then I'm not sure if I'm going to end up with anything. So I set up these perimeters based on organic shapes. And I said to myself, each day I'm going to spend 2 hours manipulating this. And it's just a line that you manipulate to make these shapes. So you just have like one signal, and then you manipulate to create these shapes using raster and vector-based kind of work. And I said to myself, okay, I'm going to give myself these perimeters and I'm going to work for 2 hours to see if I can produce that. And if I can't and I like it, I'll go back to it. Or if I can't and I don't like it, I'll stop. But I gave myself like a list of different flowers and different branches in different ways that water hits water. And one of the first ones that I did was the paper folding. And I just thought it was really beautiful. And it kind of reminded me of being in China And there are these beautiful paper factories, and they fold the paper in this like really gorgeous way. And it just kind of was like, oh, okay, well, it wasn't a flower, but it worked.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think your instincts on it and your response were like spot on, because as a viewer, I was really like enchanted by it. So immediately when I saw it in person, yeah.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
We can go ahead and wrap and conclude.
Thank you.
Yeah, it was such a pleasure hearing you speak about your work, and I just really appreciate you doing this talk for us. And on behalf of the entire Hoover Public Library community, thank you very much.
Yeah, and thanks for having me. I feel really, happy to share my work, and I feel very honored to be asked. So thank you so much.
Oh, you're welcome.